Well, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, wherever you are calling from. I'd like to welcome you to this session on Organizing for Humanitarian Development, Peace Coherence, Country Teams Perspectives. This is the second session of Ideal's knowledge sharing series on humanitarian development, peace coherence. We'd like to inform you that this session will be recorded. Before we start, we'd like to let you know that all events within the series will be available in two languages, English and French. I'd like to invite everyone now to select their preferred language for this session. You can do so by clicking the interpretation icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen and selecting either English or French. You can choose to mute the original audio or listen to it at a lower volume. If you have any questions, you can reach out to my colleague, Suzanne, through the chat box. Welcome, folks. More people are joining the call. I also wanted to introduce myself. My name is Camille Takastakas, and I am the Knowledge Management Advisor on Ideal. And for those that are just joining, you can choose either English or French for this call by clicking the interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen, as you can see on the slide. Now, we all acknowledge that achieving humanitarian development and peace coherence entails synergies across technical silos and adaptive work structures and cultures. But what does this look like in practice, and how have country teams stretched their mandates, if they did, and organized internally to deliver HDP coherent programming? This session will explore these questions from both a technical and an operations or management lens. This session is what we call a dynamic dialogue between the host and the interviewees, and between them and you, the participants. They will spend the first 45 minutes in conversation before opening it up for others in the audience to join the conversation and share your experiences and questions. You are also invited to send in your questions or comments in the chat throughout the session. Our hope is that we can create a space for peer-to-peer exchange on things that we've tried, approaches that worked, approaches that didn't, and what the workarounds have been to organizing for HDP coherence at the country level. So let's get started. I am pleased to introduce this session's dynamic dialogue host, Carrie Byrne. Carrie brings over 25 years of leadership and management experience, overseeing large, complex programs in some of the world's most challenging environments. She has worked extensively on programming related to market systems, resilience, job creation, inclusive finance, and entrepreneurship. Most recently, she has worked with organizations to incorporate adaptive management approaches into their work and has helped mobilize large multidisciplinary teams to meet strategic objectives. With that, take it away, Carrie.
Thank you, Camille, and thank you to all of you who are with us today. We're so glad to have this group to start engaging on these issues around HDP coherence. Joining me today are Heba Tibi and Dan Rooney. Heba manages the Regional Economic Empowerment Hub for CARE International in the Middle East and North Africa region. And prior to this role, she was the gender advisor and lead for the hub. So she brings that gender perspective as well, based on her work with 15 of different care offices across the region and globally. And Heba is joining us from Amman. Hi, Heba.
Hi.
We also have Dan Rooney joining us. Dan is the chief of party from the Maharo project, CRS's 5-year RIFSA, that's a Resilience Food Security Activity in Madagascar. And Dan is bringing us not only his experience from Maharo and from Madagascar, but more than 20 years of experience working in sub-Saharan Africa and all the different contexts that are included in that. Dan, welcome. So I wanted to just get us started off by kind of rooting it in the context so that everyone here understands, the perspectives that you're bringing and how you got to that. So can you, my first question for both of you is really just, it relates to, help us understand how your current work relates to HDP and really what pushed your teams to start programming in this new way? How did you get here? How did you get to HDP Coherence in your context and with your team? Heba, do you want to start us out?
Thank you so much, Carrie, and hi, everyone. We are so happy to have you here today and to have this fruitful discussion. So as Carrie mentioned, I work for CARE International, and I am going to present today what we do in MENA region, so Middle East and North Africa. CARE has been existing in the region since 1948. And as you unfortunately know, that this region is called the home to the world's worst humanitarian and refugee crisis. And we have sort of the combination of different programming that are implemented on the ground that brings emergency aid along with long-term support to make sure that we have sustainable resilience building results for the people that we are serving. We have also a couple of different programming that would focus on gender responsive emergency responses, but also women economic empowerment, food security, livelihood, climate change adaptation. So it's a different combination of programming that suits the multi-layered issues that are faced in the region. The hub specifically, and today all of my insights that I'm bringing are coming from different country offices, specifically 11 country offices. And what we try to do over years is to gather some lessons learned on programmatic approaches, how we were able to customize them in fragile and conflict-affected settings, and specifically around women economic empowerment, resilient market systems, and even Nexus programming. What pushed us actually to think about Nexus programming, it was basically the unfortunate protracted crisis. Back in 2011 also, what happened is that some donors in Palestine, Yemen, and Iraq started to ask the different country offices and the teams there to think of how we can deploy market and business forces to correspond to immediate people's needs. So how we can use the value chain approaches, the market system approaches to facilitate people's access to food, health services, and even education. Then afterwards, we started to see more and more nexus in the calls for proposals. So although we adapted our programming to fit with the different crises, we also were pushed by the external actors who became more and more interested to understand and to try and to pilot programming on the ground. The ultimate before COVID, because COVID actually was one of the crises that pushed us even to think more and more of how we can apply our programming in a more joint way, was in 2017 when donors started to ask colleagues in Jordan, Lebanon, and Turkey to work with women refugees specifically on social entrepreneurship programming, deal with them as entrepreneurs. So people with whom we always worked on humanitarian sector or humanitarian interventions, we started to work with them in non-traditional, more relaxed development way approaches. So maybe this can give you a very high level overview of how we started to think of Nexus programming.
Great, thanks, Heba. Dan, what about you? How did your team get, here?
Thanks, Carrie. And Heba, that's a really great introduction. I think our perspectives are going to complement well. Your regional focus and my ability to talk about layering development and emergency within a specific zone and a specific project should make for a really interesting dialogue. Externally, I think people imagine Madagascar to be a lush rainforest teeming with lemurs, and it is, but it's also huge. Like if you were to put it on a map of North America, it would go from Canada to Florida. And the southern 1/4 of Madagascar is essentially scrub brush desert. It looks a lot like the Sahel, but not like the Sahel after 25 years of greening interventions, more like the Sahel in the late 1990s. And that's our operating environment. And the population that's lived here has always been on the cusp of food insecurity, and they've always been one or two bad harvests away from dropping into a crisis. We've worked in the zone for an extended period. We've always had some presence, but in around 2016, under an precursor to our current DIFSA, now RIFSA, we started conversations with USAID, then OFTA, to expand our presence to provide emergency support in the zone. Initially at a small scale, but built up over the last 5-6 years from an initial $1 million to a current $15 million. That's complemented by our RIFSA funding, 5-year, $45 million project, which brings in a development suite of interventions. So right now, I'm in the regional capital of Mbuvimbe, crossing my fingers that the internet works. And I'm surrounded by communities where we're providing global food distribution to about 50% of the population, while we're concurrently providing them a suite of development interventions focused on governance, health and nutrition, agriculture livelihoods, and natural resource management and risk mitigation.
Great. Thanks, Dan. And I'm gonna pick up on something that you just said, and I'll ask you, and then I'll ask Heba the same question. So I know a lot of folks, when they come to HDP, are intimidated by one part of it, and often it's the P. Like, we don't know how to do peace. What are you to that? But it's just as common actually to find people who don't do humanitarian or don't do development. Now, both CARE and CRS are multi-mandate kind of organizations, but I'd love to hear more about, you just touched on it a little bit there. How do you balance these different things? Do you layer them? Is it a timing thing? You know, I think this is one of those big questions for people as they're stepping in, like, but how do you do that?
Sure. And within our rubric, there's a bit of a naturalness to it, because everything kind of has its season. There's a lean season during which you have to provide emergency support, those food distributions. That happens to run concurrent with your agriculture season, during which you're running development interventions, farmer field schools, improved seed varieties, etc. And then you have a suite of interventions that you can provide year-round, which really touch more on that peace and social cohesion era. Things like governance, building out last-mile institutions through literacy and other sorts of programming that empower individuals. And it all has a naturalness and sequence within emergency development needs, and honestly within just the cycles and rhythms of your work.
Yeah, isn't it true? One of the speakers yesterday said, and I just thought, yes. I don't know if all the chat folks could hear me just going, agree, when he said, you know, this separation between emergency and development, it's really internal. It's really like our problem. It's not the way people's lives are. And I just feel so much of this work is really about realigning ourselves with their reality. You know, I know we want to do it, but our structures like get in the way. You know, and it's just what I love that phrase, you know, everything has a season. I feel like, oh, that's a foothold for how you bring things together. I love that. Heba, what about you? What happens at CARE on this? How does it work?
So as you know, within the crisis, we always look at the opportunities too. And unfortunately, across the years, our teams tried different approaches. So everything beyond or before Nexus was tested. So as everyone, we started with the separation of humanitarian interventions from development. Then we started with linking relief with development, with the sequences. So emergency, relief, or early recovery, then development. Then we pushed ourselves to sort of work in a continuum where we look at the community. We have one program that has two parts, however, by that time. two parts, one humanitarian, one development. No much coordination happened on the ground, but then we moved more and more toward Nexus. As I mentioned, it's not something that we looked at intentionally. It even happened back in 2011 for different reasons, as I mentioned. We looked, and also our program participants, exactly what you mentioned, Carrie, they always guided us. They don't care if it's humanitarian, development, protection, market system, they don't care. At the end, they trust us to correspond to their needs and demands and realities. So what we do is that we spend good amount of time and effort trying to understand that the bits and pieces, the smallest pieces that would allow us to pick on systemic changes. These systemic changes might require at a certain moment humanitarian intervention or heavy investment into actions. In some cases, you can build on what you are doing and start from there immediately. And honestly, as I mentioned to you guys the other day, if there's one thing good about COVID, it was the moment where everyone knew that we cannot have two different programming separated from each other. Everyone was thinking of how to do it. Honestly, it happened by doing it. We learned about it through doing the things. It was not even by the time it was called Nexus. And maybe through our discussion, I can even give you a very brief history of how the notion even grew at CARE and what are the things that we don't still have definition for up until this moment.
It's such I agree with that learning through doing. I mean, it's not only kind of proven as the way adults learn is learning by doing, but it also, I think it's where we are as a community right now, right? Like we know what we want to do. We don't exactly know how to do it. There's lots of different challenges. I feel you've mentioned COVID. I also feel like protracted crises have pushed us to have to think in different ways. You can't have this separation. It just doesn't work to call it an emergency. Oh, and now we're done with that. Because, I mean, look at Afghanistan. It's a great example of it's gone through its cycles of things were getting better. Oh, now they're getting worse, and now they're getting better, and now they're getting worse. And there's probably a list as long as my arm of other examples like that. Dan, what's been your take from sub-Saharan Africa or other protracted crises of how the bits come together, or how we think about these things internally?
Yeah, just building on Heba's comments a little too, like how you present to community. There were a couple of things that we never actually thought through, but worked out really well. Like we have unique project names, which signal the intention, whether it's emergency focused or development focused. We also have different visuals, like the colors that our staff wear when they come to do food distribution is different from the colors and logos that our staff are wearing when they come to do community consultations or in-depth development engagement. And those types of subtle signals have been really helpful for communities.
Yeah, it's like a home, your away uniform or your home uniform for a sports team. And do the communities then respond to that? Do they understand the signaling you're doing there?
They definitely understand our intent, and they know that we're trying to provide holistic support for both emergency and development needs. There's still very much this expectation that you're talking with CRS, and regardless of what the focus of that staff member is, they have to be conversant in both our emergency work and our development work.
Mm-hmm.
And at the grassroots level, we work really hard to make sure that our staff are in communication. They're embedded in the same offices, they travel in the same vehicles. We stumbled into this great method of making sure we all know what's going on by cost sharing. So most of our actual activities are split 50-50 if they're operations based. So I, as a development staff, always have a good visual of what the emergency staff are doing. And those types of things really do, they're not strategic or high level, but they really do help with last mile coordination.
Yeah, and Heba, you probably have some good similar examples of how the coordination happened, because you said CARE kind of stumbled into it as well. It wasn't intentional in the beginning.
Definitely. So in the beginning, what happened is that, as I mentioned, back in 2016, the notion was becoming, the Nexus word was becoming very much, we started to see it in different calls for proposals by the different donors. And then CARE had an internal discussion. So when I say CARE, it's like the global level. They brought different actors, including practitioners, thought leaders, designers of programs, and people were divided into two groups. Some people who are open and with Nexus programming, and some colleagues were against. So in order to define what is our position as an organization, a research was launched. And this research was done on two levels. The first one focused more on that definition of Nexus, because some colleagues, they said, we are completely against it, and they had legitimate fears towards it when it comes to political instrument, top down, you know, all of these fears that they had towards the humanitarian principles. But then, so we digged into the notion, brought different definitions, because by that time it was a word with different definitions, still high level, but different. And then we looked at existing examples. So as I mentioned, there is no disconnect between, I confirm, no disconnect between the global teams and the country offices teams, but there is no way that anyone would grasp what is happening on the ground within 100 country offices. So what happened is that the team started to dig on examples of what has been implemented on the ground. Successful examples and not so successful example, if I can say it in a diplomatic way. So what happened is, and exactly, what happened is that we found that programmatically, there are practices on the ground. However, operationally, organizational level, structural level, there is no coherence when it comes to the implementation. So what happened is that we started to talk to the colleagues around, so what would make Nexus something that you would apply? And all of us, although we don't have one clear definition for Nexus that fits with the 100 and even more in the different countries, 100 contexts in the countries, we still have 9 guiding principles that gave sort of a core model, definition of a core model that we should apply and comply with, while giving the space for the different colleagues to tweak and to redesign according to the context. Up until now, we still don't have a detailed definition for Nexus, and specifically for the D component of the HDP Nexus. And what is happening is that it's kept for the program participants to help the country offices and guide them to actually define it according to what happens. And I give always this example. When we dig with our program participants to help us understand the definition of peace, the spectrum is so wide. It starts from 2 countries level peace building and ends with this quote from one community: peace for me is access to water. So this is what we do. We are still grasping and trying to learn and getting information, but we have at least core guiding principles that we cannot give up or we have to comply with when implementing the program.
Wow, I think everybody would love to see a copy of those principles so they can see how they apply to their own context, their own country office, their own. One of the things I'm really aware of in this session is that yesterday's session was the high level thinking, you know, the commitment that the leadership is kind of showing to helping us figure this out and making the funding available for that kind of thing. Today is really about the operational and the technical and the, you know, boots on the ground kind of moments. So I do want to make sure we switch into a conversation that includes kind of, so what does it look like? You've given us such a good taster so far of how the internal process worked at CARE to get there. And Dan, you have too, with like, some of the examples of falling into it, or cost sharing, and we've got some questions about cost sharing, but let's dig into some more examples around the operational and the technical. You know, lots of people would put these as 2 different categories, but I find sometimes operation drives which technical approaches you can use, and sometimes technical approaches drive your operational plans. So I'll leave it to you. But can you give us some really practical examples that the folks who are joining us can use and maybe take to their own teams? Dan, we'll start with you and then go to Heba. Or just jump in, both of you, with each other, build on each other.
Sure. We maintain two separate organizational charts. And the heads of the development team and the emergency team are both members of the senior management staff that report to the country representative. We hold basically weekly coordination meetings at our headquarters office, and then those are complemented and by constant coordination meetings at our sub-office. I'm right now about 40 kilometers away from our last mile sub-offices in Siumbe and Bedu, where we have about 300 staff in total. I would say 70 of them are focused on the emergency team and 220 of them are part of our development team. They would operate in almost constant coordination. On the operations side, staffing are often pooled, and they would support logistics for both the development projects and the emergency projects. That would mean that oftentimes vehicles are pooled, logistical support is pooled, finance, pushing paper is all pooled, but the actual development teams and the implementing staff for last mile to community are unique to each project. So essentially from specialist officer levels upwards, there's unique organograms, and it becomes a little bit blended when you get down to the field level.
Got it. So that's a bit of the operational structure. Heba, what kind of examples do you have that that teams can use and apply in their own contexts?
So on the technical level, there are three major points that are brought up globally all the time when we talk about Nexus: the analysis, the type of programming, and the monitoring and evaluation. Ideally, this should be happening in a very joint, integrated manner. Now, with the analysis and data collection tools, just like what Dan was mentioning, we still have two different teams: the humanitarian team and the more resilience combination of different teams. So you would find, for instance, food security, you would have women economic justice. We have also some other teams that work on a market-based approaches team. And these three teams somehow consist the more sustainable development or development component of the program. What happens are three levels in care: the country office level, the regional level, and the global level. And there are also, of course, maybe we can touch later on the challenges, but there are different components when it comes to the operationalization of Nexus programming. And this starts from the vision, where we look at the leadership as in the same time with the practitioners themselves. But honestly, the leadership around the vision, the directions toward how we create the strategy, the design of the program. And this happens on the top level, like at a global level. Then also we have the structural global levels, where we have, again, the two different teams, but then more and more coordination mechanisms are introduced. So now we have colleagues from humanitarian team, in addition to what also Dan mentioned, all of the colleagues, the senior management team is composed of representatives of the thematic area. But for instance, within humanitarian team, we see within the steering committee, market-based approaches team sitting, food water system sitting, women economic justice teams sitting, so that also we can tweak and adapt our programming to the different contexts and vice versa. And what happened is that by doing that, the spell is that the change and the coordination is dropped down across everyone. So what we have on the global level is going to the regional level and even going to the country office level. With the high level coordination from global level being transferred to MENA, for instance, we have regional management units. The regional level coordinates between the different country offices of somehow similar contexts. And then we can have there are some specific tools that we tweak in order to be able to implement. And these tools include all what is related, for instance, to data collection, to data analysis, to the development of the country office strategy, and even to financial mechanisms, including, for instance, procurement systems. So what we have done is that over the last years, again, there were two different tools used by humanitarian team and for sustainable development or livelihood teams, different names for the development approach. And these include, for instance, systems related to more relaxed procurement, more urgent procurement, more relaxed data collection like rapid gender analysis tools, and more detailed market system analysis tools. What we have done is we combined many of these tools. So the rapid gender analysis traditionally used in humanitarian context now has a section in some countries that includes also economic empowerment and development component. The procurement programs, for certain cases, it is care that sets the program or the design of the tool. In other cases, we were able to convince the donor to give us either more flexibility for the development programming, where we can really jump in certain moment to do more quick, more easier procurement, but that corresponds to the aim at the end. And these are sort of examples that I can bring. There are specific examples to different country offices, and if you want, I can share more and more.
So some of the operational, oh yeah, go ahead, Dan.
Sorry, I just want to emphasize one of Heba's comments. I've seen a shift over the years from our emergency team looking at all the data that we're collecting on the development side as something that's superfluous and extra and irrelevant to what they do, to now seeing the value added in it and wanting to engage more and more to our sort of in-depth understanding of issues such as gender or even census counts for communities. So it's been great to see that synergy building and to see the emergency team come to value data that we're collecting for development regardless.
Right, and so important for protracted crises, that sharing of data and understanding a different timeline picture. So I just want to recap because the different kind of operational tools or tactics that I heard you guys talk about were pooled staffing and cost sharing, shared M&E, breaking down the silos, so different coordination between the technical units or technical teams, using, I'm putting words in your mouth a little bit, Heba, you can correct me, but using connectors. So they might be technical people who are working across different countries that have similar contexts, but using those connectors to help share information. Did I already say co-financing? I think I did. And then the last one, and I loved this example when you were talking about it the other day, Heba, of really getting folks to use each other's tools and understand why the different tools are different for different contexts, and kind of creating shared understanding through the use of those tools. It links, Dan, to your last point there of sharing data, understanding why that other data might be useful. Did I forget any points, Dan and Heba? Did I miss anything in that little recap, or did it bring up anything else?
As you were talking, I wanted to add, like, there's a deliberateness to it. Like, you have to put staff on the same levels. You have to have coordinated meetings with senior leadership oversight to encourage coordination.
Right, I agree, that intentionality, and I think this is where I'm gonna put on my little adaptive management hat and go, and reflection. Regular reflection of what is working and not working and why, back to your point, Heba, of some stuff just doesn't work. If this was easy, they wouldn't need so many of us doing our jobs, right? So we have to reflect and figure out why something didn't work and what can be done differently in the future. I'm so grateful that donors have shifted away from, if it didn't work, then you were bad, you know, which is, there was a period of time when it felt like that. And I think donors have really changed and recognized how much learning is an important piece of this. But all of that's kind of operational. I think we must have some technical examples for our audience today too, right? Who's going to jump in with a technical example?
If you want, I can start then, and then you can build on that. So maybe, as I mentioned, there are, like, when it comes to the joint analysis tools, we have the rapid gender analysis tool. We have another tool that is used normally in emergency contexts, like what we call emergency preparedness plan. Traditionally, this was done, although it's a country office level product, it was done by the humanitarian team, who would look and assess potential peaks of crisis or potential emergency situations, and they would prepare this plan. What happened is that recently, in some country offices, it is not the task of humanitarian team alone at all. Development colleagues are also joining, and they are bringing their knowledge when it comes to specific supply chains, potential value chain actors that we already know or worked with. So this is another example that I can bring. Another area of implementation was the joint management units, where we, for certain programs, not everyone, not all countries, for certain projects, and based on donors' demand, there was what we call the creation of joint management units. And these joint management units would have humanitarian team, development team, and even partners, representatives of partners, colleagues from the different actors beyond care. And there things happen. Honestly, most of the clashes used to happen there. And one of my top favorite practices that we were able to apply in one country office in Jordan was the rotation of management. In order, the team was so smart, and they said, in order to finish or to end up this clash, these clashes, we want the head of the humanitarian team to do a deployment for the Sustainable Development Program, and we want the development colleague to do the humanitarian team management. And then the magic happened. They could understand the different components, the different aspects, the different perspective, and they were able to bring it together. It was not like as easy as I'm mentioning it, but it took some effort where they were able to test and apply and think differently from what we are so acquainted with. So these are examples. Maybe I can also share that in one country office, in order to do joint logical frame or log frame or data collection or meal system, they had to think of the strategy of the program. And this is Yemen, where they said, we cannot do a joint data collection or monitoring unless we do the one program approach. So they sat together, Women Economic Empowerment Team, Livelihood and Sustainable Development Team, and the Humanitarian Team, now sitting in the same unit that they call Food Security and Livelihood Unit, where they all created one program, one pot. So instead of having the different components sitting in the same place, literally they mixed everyone and they came up with the meal tools that they created jointly. So these are other technical related examples.
I love that idea of internal job switching. That's a great idea. Heba, the French translator, is asking for just a slower pace. I do this too. When I get excited, I talk faster.
I apologize.
No, those are some great little tactics and tools. Dan, do you have more to share on the technical side of how we get our
yeah, just wait for the translator to hear me talk about our work in agriculture, because it gets me pretty excited. And I do think it's a great example. It's specific, and it shows the linkages between development and emergency. So prior to 2021, lack of seeds in the South was not considered an emergency problem. And all of our agriculture work and seed systems work was under the RIFSA. We built out 90 farmer learning centers supporting about 16,000 smallholder farmers. And we looked around and realized that there were no seeds. So we, as the development actor, were informing USAID, FAO, all the other like emergency actors that this was an emergency.
Right.
And no one was prepared to deal with it. USAID was wonderfully quick to respond and provide an emergency award for 1 year, which later became 2 years, worth of seeds for 60,000 households. And in collaboration with FAO, local governments, and a couple of private sector actors, we, Maharu Development, acted as the hub to import seeds from South Africa that brought in new varieties, served 60,000 households, and actually hit the mark because for the first time in about 5 years, there was sufficient rainfall for a harvest.
Oh, that's fabulous.
And like, had our development team not noticed that gap and leveraged the ability of the emergency teams to respond quickly, none of those households would have seen a harvest this year.
Yeah, that's such a great example of having your teams work together. And I'm going to ask you to pick up on a point from our discussion the other day, because you were talking about how sometimes when we're trying to make these shifts with our donors, the communication is so important. Do you want to tell folks who weren't in our conversation yesterday about that communication with USAID, communication with donors? Tell us more about that.
Yeah, of course. So the reason that CRS is able to work in both emergency and development in southern Madagascar is a function of ongoing conversations from all the way back to 2016, where we started signaling the need to bring in emergency work. And we're very deliberate about having weekly one-on-ones with our activity manager at USAID Local, having monthly calls that are three-party with our emergency team, our development team, and BHA Washington. And we're constantly ensuring that all parties are in such sufficient communication that it's just a natural synergy. Like, our activity manager is equally comfortable coming to me talking emergency, equally comfortable going to our head of programming talking development, because they have the confidence that we're communicating with each other and that we each know what the other team is doing. Yeah. And because we were able to build up slowly, show a deliberate plan over the 8 years, we've arrived at the point that we're at now, incrementally.
Yeah, I had a very similar experience in Ethiopia, where those weekly, we always had Friday lunch with USAID, and it made such a difference for when things didn't go right. You kind of were able to say, well, this is happening, but we have a plan, and I'm not sure our plan is going to be able to work, but we're working on a second version of a plan. Like, okay, here's what happened. And there's a lot, I think USAID is just made up of people too, right? They need to be forewarned, and they could be supportive to us because they understood that we had made efforts. And I just think, of course it's true in multiple contexts, but really keeping those communication lines open are so important when you're trying to do something a little bit new, right? Mm-hmm. To show that you in little ways are making these changes. It makes the big changes or the big pivots just a lot easier, I think. Right.
And just to further that point a little bit, it's especially true in COVID times, when oftentimes our USAID colleagues are blocked from field visits. Like, I greatly value my years back in Washington now, just pushing paper, because I understand the perspective of our AORs and our ORs who aren't getting to the field and who aren't having that reinvigoration from seeing the work directly.
Yeah, I always used to say to my team, know your deadlines for reports, but also know your donors' deadlines so that you can get them stuff, even if it has to go into a formal report later. You can get them stuff that they can report on because they got deadlines too. You know, like just be a team there as well, right? I do really want to give the audience a chance to engage with us as well. I can see some of the questions coming through, and I want to ask audience, I want to pivot to actually a bit of a chat storm. So here are the instructions for the chat storm. I want to ask you, what surprised you about this conversation, or what do you want to hear more about? Or what kind of great examples do you have to share? Type it up, but don't hit send yet. I'm going to give everybody 1 minute to type in their chat, and then we'll hit send all together. So that way you aren't influenced by what other folks are saying, and we can hear where everybody's head is at. Then Heba and Dan, we may pick up on a couple of those really quickly, and then we'll open up to the wider questions that are coming in. So I'm going to give you 30 seconds more. Hopefully you've been typing as I've been gabbing here. I'm going to give you 30 seconds more when your chat is ready. Get your chat ready. And the question is, what surprised you about the conversation? Or what would you like to hear more about? Or what examples do you have? And when I say go, then hit send. All right. Let's see how many people are actually listening, Heba and Dan, listening to the instructions and not trying to multitask. I know you out there. All right. Ready, set, go. Hit send. Here they come. The importance, oh my gosh, so many. How concrete so they're surprised by how concrete some of the steps can be. And I think that's a thing with adaptive management as well of it's small things, right? It can be really small, simplistic things. What else do we have here? How the idea of resilient households and communities, many programs do have resilience at the center of that. So how can, oh, that's a great question. How can resilience, or how does HDP contribute to resilience activities? I think there's a really strong linkage there. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that, Heba or Dan, about how resilience and HDP come together? I know you guys are looking at the chat too. I'm going to pull you out of the chat. Tell me about resilience and HDP.
Then do you want to go first, or shall I go with one example?
Heba, I defer to you.
Thank you. So for care, resilience is defined as preparing people to, first of all, to survive shocks, but then to get adapted to it, and then better correspond and anticipate potential shocks in the future. Very similar to what Dan was mentioning. Looking from a program working under food security program, humanitarian tools, we were able, through the market system analysis, to identify certain areas that are related to food security and humanitarian and emergency even situations. And I can bring here the sheep and goat dairy value chain. One of the things that when we did the analysis, and it was an analysis from a consumer's perspective, we wanted to know what are their preferences. It led us to go backwards from the consumer's end towards the practices, because they said that there are certain attributes that they don't like in that specific value chain. So we went dig backwards, and we found that animal feed is actually the major constraint that would affect the quality and quantity of milk that would definitely affect the attributes of the final product. What we have done through the development program is the following. In Palestine, the market is so much controlled by different factors, including the conflict. So there are certain moments of facilitating the access to animal feed. We have certain small scale units to produce animal feed. There are no silos to store animal feed, the ingredients. So what we have done is that we try to do a very quick market or feasibility analysis. And we were able to see the potential market. And when I say market, I mean small scale producers, the smallest scale producers of sheep and goat dairy. What happened is that we wanted to make sure that we facilitate access to affordable, high quality, consistent animal feed, but we did it through a big investor. We showed this investor the potential size of the market where this person can facilitate or can have big silos that can ensure consistency of the quality of feed and the affordability of the produce when it comes to farmers in different locations in Palestine. And with feasibility analysis within a program that is funded by Development Window, that costed $7,000, the feasibility analysis. This investor put $15 million and created an animal feed factory that is currently providing access for smallest scale producers to have access to this consistent animal feed. So this is something for us. They have consistent access, better resilience. They, in certain cases, during shocks related to political situations, related to climate change, farmers could not have silos, could not have even access to certain animal feed. Now they have it in a more consistent manner, affordable manner, with a high quality. I hope that this example answered the question. Sorry, Dan, it was a long one. To you.
Thanks, Heba. Honestly, Rubaiyat, the communities that we work with, we wouldn't be able to undertake any resilience building, any development initiatives in the absence of emergency support. A lot of the households we support are IPC3 plus, IPC4. They're really on the threshold. And it's that emergency support that provides just enough foundation that we can undertake some of those more long-term focused resiliency activities, such as our governance work, our under 5 nutrition work, and our agriculture and natural resource management. So for us, there's an essential synergy to it, and we couldn't do one without the other.
Great, thank you. You know, we have a couple of different folks in the chat who are rightly shaking their chat fingers at us to say, you haven't talked enough about the peace piece, right? So here's my platform. What about peace? We've done a great job of talking about humanitarian development. What about the peace?
So maybe I don't want Dan to start unless you are okay with that. Maybe because I will give different examples from different contexts. What do you think? Do you want to go first?
I personally, based on our conversation from the other day, I think your context lends itself more to this conversation than mine. So I again defer.
Thank you. So what I can give is different examples. As I mentioned, peace definition comes from different contexts in a different ways. So for instance, with Care Turkey, one of the major components that we don't give up, whether it is a humanitarian donor or a development donor, what we always include is the peace building between the hosting and refugee communities and refugees. So for us, this is the basic peace component. There was lots of hostility between the two groups with the first years, simply because there was like a competition over the very rare job opportunities or economic opportunities. So what we have done is that we diffused, in addition to joint programming between the two communities, peace building activities, workshops, actions, and even language courses to make sure that we can have better interaction between the hosting communities and the refugees. I remember one program was sharing recipes, and this made huge breakthroughs between women when they trusted each other. So this is one example of how the colleagues were able to integrate peace building in the program that they have with women entrepreneurs. Another example is exactly building on what Dan was saying. One of the major conflict stimulators are natural resources, access to water, grazing lands, etc. Most of our food security humanitarian programs that are working on facilitating farmers' access to grazing land now integrates joint community peace building / natural resource management perspective. And this is what we do in different contexts, in different country offices. Now, in Yemen, this takes another perspective. Of course, the Yemeni context, you know that it's a huge conflict between, I don't know how many actors on the ground. But we pick what we can do with the country offices and with the do no harm principles, that we make sure that we don't harm, first of all, our program participants. One of the areas that we need to intervene in is the image of women, which is related to gender transformative programming and approaches. When we worked with women producers, we found at a certain moment that what we used to do, not only CARE, but everyone, when we used to have these micro-income generating program, we were actually, in certain cases, harmful on women, harmful on potential community backlash, because they are playing non-traditional roles, harmful in terms of domestic violence, because the more women become more independent, more powerful to take decisions, this stimulated backlash from within the house and generated domestic violence. And then there was another layer of hostility that came against women. I don't know the word in English, but let me try to explain it. At certain communities, there were these actors, gangsters, if I can say it, and these gangsters would be attacking specifically women, asking for a form of a completely unlegitimate tax. So if I own a business, they would come and they would ask you to pay this protection tax from their perspective. What we have done is that for women, they said, we don't want to continue. This is so unpeaceful. Imagine in a context like Yemen, where you have certain perceptions around peace definition, they said that this is what we want you to work on. So we brought different actors, including different local authorities, representatives, private sector actors, to solve this issue through a hotline where they could reach, women for the first time could reach local authorities to complain or to hint that there is these gangsters are in the area. And this is how they got, like, for instance, protected. These are very, very high level examples. And if you want, there are more, but I don't want to take more.
But you've made me remember an example that I haven't thought about for years, which is, you know, when I was just a young thing and still had brown hair, I worked at a peace organization, and I was in Jerusalem, and I was taught by my very experienced Palestinian and Israeli exec directors that the point is to get people talking about anything, you know, talk about things that aren't important, and you can at least get them talking, and you can move on to other easier or harder topics once you've built that foundation. And we a project I work on in Ethiopia had a similar experience or approach to natural resource management that you just described, where the conflict that's happening between agro-pastoralists and pastoralists, we really built in the space for these peace building conversations. And it reminds me that the P in this HDP is likely to be us choosing the lens, as opposed to, it's not necessarily different activities than we're already doing. It's the way we choose to make those activities happen and the collaboration that we bring at the community level. I am getting a message from the powers that be. So So Dan, do you have anything you want to contribute in like 30 seconds on that piece thing? I'm getting the message that we need to hear from our audience.
I thought Heba said it all. Please just move on.
So we wanted to create an opportunity in this conversation to hear from the audience, to hear audience perspectives. And I'm not going to put anybody on the spot, although I could, because you've made some great comments in the chat. So I hope people are looking at the chat. But if you've got an example, we've been talking about resilience, we've been talking about peace, or even a technical or operational example that relates back to our earlier conversation, raise your hand and we'll open the mic up to hear from not just our panelists, but to hear examples from the rest of the audience. So if anybody has anything to share, it could be a question, but we'd love to hear your examples too. Just hit that raise hand button, which must be somewhere, or maybe not if we don't have a. We do not have the ability to raise our hands, tech people. There we go. Lucienne, let's hear from you.
Merci beaucoup aux panélistes. Je suis Lucien Wali, projet VIM+, au Burkina Faso, dans le centre nord funded by USA. Alors, merci beaucoup à Heba et puis à Dan. On a vu dans leur partage qu'ils ont à la fois des départements humanitaires et des départements de développement, donc qui travaillent ensemble pour la mise en œuvre des activités. Mais nous, au niveau de notre organisation, nous n'avons pas cette division-là. Et nous nous sommes retrouvés sur un projet de développement qui, malheureusement, a rencontré des défis humanitaires en cours d'implémentation. Donc, c'est pratiquement quelque chose de nouveau pour nous qui étions dans une démarche de développement et qui, à un moment donné, devons adresser les questions de besoins humanitaires dans la région du centre-nord du Burkina Faso, si vous connaissez le contexte. Alors, qu'est-ce qui s'est passé au cours de la deuxième année d'implémentation? Nous avons eu un clash, ce que nous appelons le clash de résilience, où beaucoup d'actifs sont retombés. Alors, qu'est-ce que nous avons fait? Rapidement, nous avons fait le partage des cibles. On a fait une analyse des cibles pour voir quelles sont les cibles qui sont dans le besoin de réhabilitation, de relèvement, et quelles sont les cibles qui avaient encore quelques actifs sur lesquels on pouvait construire des actifs de développement. Et après cela, nous avons construit pour les cibles humanitaires un contingency plan, d'accord? Et nous n'avions pas un fonds additionnel, comme Dan l'a dit. Dan a eu un fonds additionnel, mais nous, on n'a pas un fonds additionnel. Donc, nous étions obligés de modifier la planification des activités de développement pour prendre en charge cette partie des besoins humanitaires. Donc, c'est le contingency plan qui nous a permis de faire ce séquençage. Ensuite, nous avons fait une analyse des besoins spécifiques des cibles en besoin de relèvement. Et après, nous avons étudié la contribution des partenaires humanitaires dans la zone. Et donc, nous avons tenu des discussions de collaboration avec ces partenaires-là pour enfin définir le paquet nécessaire pour le relèvement, mais aussi nous entendre sur les cibles qui avaient réellement besoin de ce paquet-là. Donc, cela nous a permis d'apprécier davantage ce qu'il fallait, mais aussi d'être précis sur les cibles et éviter les doublons. Donc, le côté développement, nous avons continué avec les cibles qui avaient certains actifs avec une approche de cofinancement. C'est-à-dire qu'on demandait aux participants de rester engagés à participer à eux-mêmes leur propre développement. Alors, pour finir, le défi que nous avons trouvé, c'est au bout de la mise en œuvre de l'année de relèvement, nous avons eu des difficultés pour amener les cibles qui étaient sous assistance humanitaire vers la dynamique du développement. Parce qu'elles étaient déjà habituées à une certaine assistance et lorsqu'on leur a parlé de cofinancement, elles ont dit, mais qu'est-ce qui se passe? L'an passé, nous étions en assistance et cette année, vous nous demandez de contribuer. Donc, actuellement, c'est le défi au niveau de Vim+. Donc, nous ne sommes pas d'obédience humanitaire. Nous ne sommes pas une Assiri Voca, c'est pas une organisation humanitaire. On est dans le développement. Et donc là, on gère au fur et à mesure cette crise-là. Et donc, nous sommes vraiment l'exemple parfait d'une programmation adaptative d'un programme de développement en situation d'insécurité humanitaire. Merci beaucoup. Over.
Thank you, Lucien. That's a great reminder of the importance of really engaging the community and making sure your messaging is clear so that expectations are laid out appropriately. I don't know, Dan or Heba, did you want to reflect on that at all? And then I'll go to Edouard after you.
Just to mention that I worked in Burkina for 4 years. It's close to my heart, and thank you for your efforts, Awali.
Great. Let me pivot to then Edouard. Do you want to go ahead and share your experience with HDP Coherence?
Okay. So good afternoon. Good afternoon to everybody, and thanks for you three for facilitating the meeting. So I am Edouard Chendrobego. So this is a French name, so this will be difficult to pronounce it in English. But I am this chief of party of the ASPER project. It is a USAID funded project, but an initiative of Feed the Future. So here, what I want to score is that we are a development project, but our effort complements peace effort because the project started in 2019. So during the conception phase, with the USAID, we reflected on the impact of land insecurity. So, and we came to the conclusion that land insecurity, it leads to conflict, and conflict in return, slow down development efforts. So, and then we try to develop a project called ASTER, and basically what we wanted to do is to combat land insecurity with the expectation that it will bring peace, so, and then promote development. Promote development how? So it has two components. The project has two components because we do local governance. We promote local governance. So at the commune level, because we have the Burkina Faso, the way Burkina Faso is structured. So we have the region, we have the national setting, we have the regional setting, and then we go down to villages. So, and what we did, we work at the regional level. So, and from time to time, we have action in the villages. So at the region, at the commune level, we try to reinforce, the governance of the different structures. So, for instance, we help the commune have good land security, bodies, and we do that because we want them to help local population secure their land. So they register, their land, have land titles for the agricultural lands, and these contribute to reduce conflict because if I have my land, say I have my farmland, so and then I am exploiting the farmland and I don't have any document, on this land. Right. So anybody can say, okay, can contest, can oppose my ownership. But if I have a document for this land, no, even if there is a conflict between, me and somebody else, I can show my land document. So this is the first thing we do with the commune. So we kind of like combat insecurity by institutional.
So it's a traditional, we think of land titling as much more of a development activity, but I think what you're describing is really how it has this peace building aspect to it as well. Am I getting that right?
Yes, because it is something that's contribute to peace and development at the same time.
Yeah.
Because, like I said, we support the commune, I mean the municipality. So institutionally, technically, because we train them, we provide them with tools for land titling, because we are using one approach in land titling. We are using MAST. There is a tool called MAST, Mobile Application to Secure Tenure. It is a USAID tool. USAID, it is a developed tool, and this has been adapted to Burkina Faso context. And easily you can use this tool, to effectively, have a title for your land. So this is what we are trying to do to improve, not only to provide the commune with this tool, but also to train them on how to use the tool. And also, because in Burkina Faso, land titling, it is the responsibility of the municipality. But the problem, the municipality is not well trained enough, to conduct it, because there is a law that governs what we call the law 34/2009 that govern how to title land in rural area. But the problem is that one thing is to, to develop a law. The other thing is to give the people who implement the law, to give them the means not to implement the law. And sometimes the government of Burkina Faso, so they have the law, but people who are in charge of who must implement this that don't even know what the law is about.
Absolutely. Thanks for that example, Edward. It's a great reminder of how important it is to understand the context, and different partners in different contexts are really the right thing. Thank you so much. I think just for time, we're going to have to leave that there, and we'll go to Pauline, and that'll be our last audience contribution. But thank you for that example. It's a great reminder. Pauline.
Yes. Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Pauline Chibli, and I'm a senior resilience advisor at Mercy Corps. I will be very, very quick, but I just wanted to mention maybe something that we started doing at the agency level regarding the link between resilience and HDP that has been mentioned before. So we started doing some portfolio realignment in our country mission. And it's really started with the deep dive analysis about what our current portfolio is doing and what are the key capacities that people really need to cope, adapt, and thrive in the face of shocks and stresses. So we analyzed how some of our humanitarian development and peace building work can really support building these specific capacities, and what are the gaps? What are the gaps that should be funded to Mercy Corps or to with partnership, with different partnerships with local authorities, like the same thing that Edward just mentioned. But it takes quite some time and an engagement from multiple actors, but doing these deep analysis is really critical to see where we are good and what's really missing to ensure that this HDP is coherent. So for us, it's really the resilience piece is our mandate, and the HDP coherence is the framework to achieve resilience. It's really through these collective actions that we can build resilience. And I think that helped our country team to also understand a bit better what resilience is about.
I really like that way of fitting them together, where resilience is the mandate and HDP is the framework. That works for me as well. Yes, I've been involved in some similar efforts to kind of map out where are, for our target populations, what are the capacities that need to be built, what shocks are they facing, and I think I completely agree with your point, Pauline, that it's a great way of helping the team see things in a more holistic way and how different projects fit to support different pieces of the puzzle. And then, we need to find a donor who's willing to fund this kind of activities, because right now we've missed that whole big piece.
Absolutely.
Heba, Dan, any reflections on either Edouard or Pauline's contributions just now?
I think both brought great examples and perspectives. Thank you so much for sharing. And I took note of that phrase that Pauline has shared. So thank you so much for that. It summarizes everything.
And Dan is good. He has indicated his concurrence with what we've just been discussing. I just want to give our panelists, first I want to say thank you to our panelists because you've done such a great job today. I want to give you, it's been a really dynamic, fun conversation. I want to give you a chance to give us maybe 2 or 3 takeaways, or, you know, I always like to say to my team, if we walk out of the meeting and we only know 2 things, you know, what do you want to make sure that we know at the end of that meeting? So, you know, 2 or 3, but tell us what you want to make sure that we remember from kind of today's conversation that we can practically apply to the work in the field in a really, you know, practical sense. Dan, why don't you go first?
Sure, thanks, Carrie. And I agree, I really enjoyed the conversation too. And at this point, I can safely say the internet held up for me. So I guess my key takeaways would be just start your conversation early and be really deliberate and realistic about planning. We arrived where we are today, not by thinking we'd be a $15 million emergency plus $10 million development project, but really from a much, much smaller, humbler base, and we grew over time. There were moments where we bulged, but just in general, there was a pace to it that was sustainable for the office. Right. And then that helped us to leverage some of our presence in the region and some of our like physical assets, like the actual offices, the logistics, the vehicles, our representational staff. And then finally, you have to be deliberate and just intentional about creating coordination within the office. I'd recommend having separate teams, separate organograms with equal levels of leadership that both report to your country representative or equivalent, such that both teams feel as though they're on equal footing. And that'd be it for my takeaways.
Great, great. Heba, what about you?
For me, I always tell my colleagues that Nexus is a journey. It's not a trip. You have to prepare yourself for a journey that you have to pass through. And even I remember the first time we presented or we started to talk about what does Nexus mean in terms of definition back in 2016. The colleagues, when they used to immediately, when they hear the word, they would go to Google and they would find like, I don't know how many definitions or even sectors with Nexus. And now, just while we were talking, it's around 500 million definitions or 500 million findings if you hit the word Nexus on Google. My major takeaway is to listen to different actors and then to act accordingly. Listen to their community, listen to external actors, including those that we don't know, we don't work with, to better understand their pain points, opportunities, and then react. And most importantly, listen to our colleagues, listen to the different perspectives that the colleagues are bringing, and then try to understand again their pain points, their fears, and then act accordingly.
Thank you. And I think I'm gonna use the advantage of having the mic to add my own 2, which are building on that listening. I want to just remind everybody to learn by doing. Try, take that collaboration and try to do something. And I want to bring us full circle then with my last point, which is built on a comment Dan made, which was everything has a season. And I think when we look at the lives of our target populations and key community members that we're trying to work with, remembering that we're, these divisions sit in our world, not in theirs. And so understanding everything has a season, there's a good time to bring out different things. How can we be more reflective of what they need, even as we plan our HDP coherence? So that's those are my 2 takeaways from this today. Camille, over to you.
Great. Wow. Heba, Dan, and Carrie, that has given us goosebumps. We have a side chat here on the back end, and we just all really agree that this has been such a fantastic conversation, really honest and raw share outs of what's been going on at the country program level. And I'm certain that our audience members have been able to glean a lot of insights, and also wanted to thank the audience for their participation in the chat box, for raising your hands and sharing your own experiences. Thank you all so much. This wraps up this session and the opening week for the knowledge sharing series. Carrie, Heba, and Dan, thank you so much for being here with us today. I do want to mention that because this is a series over the next few months, IDEAL will provide opportunities for you to dive deeper into 4 thematic areas that you see on your screen. These are thematic areas that were drawn from focus group discussions we held with implementers earlier this year. So the first thematic area after KSS opening week is advancing locally led HDP coherence. It's scheduled for later this month. Registration for these sessions are already open. So click the link in the chat to learn more about sessions under that thematic area and to register. In July, we will explore the second thematic area, which will look at data for decision making. And that has been mentioned a lot in this session. So if you want to dig in deeper into data, we encourage you to join us in July. In early August, we'll then explore communication and coordination for HDP coherence. And then our final thematic area, which is very, very critical to all of this work, is sequencing, layering, and integrating across different types of assistance. Finally, in September, after 4 months of this learning journey, we will hold a culmination event to look back at what we've learned together throughout the series and cross-pollinate across these thematic areas. Together, we'll reflect on how we can adapt to promote HDP coherence and how this knowledge sharing series may help guide our collective next steps. So the registration for the other thematic areas will open in the coming weeks or months. So we're doing it on a rolling basis. So please stay updated by subscribing to the FSN Network newsletter and by following FSN Network on LinkedIn or Twitter. Lastly, we would love to hear your thoughts on this session so we can improve on our future events. Our session survey is linked in the chat. It should only take around 3 minutes or less to complete only 3 questions. That said, we will keep the Zoom meeting open and we'll play some nice music in the background as you complete the survey. Again, Heba, Dan, and Carrie, this has been so valuable. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your perspectives. And we hope to see everyone, hopefully, at the end of this month in the sessions for the first thematic area. Thank you all again, and stay on and complete the survey.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for your time and inputs.
Thanks all.